Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ryan, and this is Real Talk with Ryan. It is October 14th, and wow, we are blessed and excited to have Dara Czerwonka on for us. And maybe you can pronounce your last name for me because I think I got it, but um, she is running for District 3 of Escondido City Council. You and I have met. We met about a year ago, and you first talked to me in our office, actually in this room where I'm sitting right now, about your vision for the community and your desire to advance some of the work you've already done in public service and really do it at the city level. And I was so impressed with your vision for why you wanted to do this that I was hopeful that we'd have a chance to get you on before the election. So I'm thrilled that you're here. I know that our guests, both on the call today, but also who are going to view this later, are going to learn from you and get a little bit of an insight into how this process has been, but also why you do it and why the community matters. So with that, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Let's just start with, tell us a little about you and what you're doing and why for the City Council.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. And it's Dara Czerwonka, so you're very close on that last name. And it is a real pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I have come to elected service just because I have been a lifelong service provider and I think community contributor. I've run nonprofit businesses for many, many years, started right out of graduate school in 1994. So it's been a really long time. And I have just always felt like I wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And so, you know, my career has taken me, you know, in a lot of different interesting directions. And it sort of came to a place in 2014 where I was asked to consider running for a public election. At that time, it was to really help out our health system. And since I had a background in that, I thought that would be great. So I had to be asked 12 times because, you know, when women have to, you know, go into public service, elected service, they have to be asked 12 times for a man's one time, apparently, I've heard. So after the 12th time, I agreed and ran and just felt like I was able to contribute. And so have sort of stuck with it. And just want to, you know, help my city. When I heard that Olga Diaz was, you know, retiring from the seat, I thought that I would try to come in and help out. And so that's how I have come to this place.
Well, thank you for coming to the spot to volunteer. I know that public service can be very rewarding, but also can be very draining. There are good parts of every job and bad parts of every job, but you have so much burden to carry of the community, and being willing to take that burden on and represent those in the city, both for the well-being of the people in your district, but also the city at large. Being a business in the city, we appreciate your willingness to serve. You talked briefly in that first statement about elected office, and you've done different things in public service, and you've done different things on boards and in different groups. And I love to hear, it's interesting to me, the difference between running for an elected seat versus volunteering. And I know there's so much that goes into that. The chat box is open. If any of you have questions, feel free to chat them in. I'll work them in. But let's start with that. I mean, what's the difference between a volunteer public service seat and an elected seat?
Well, you know, they're probably more similar than they are different. So when you go into, say, a nonprofit and sit on that nonprofit board, as you know, since you do that as well, it obviously has a level of responsibility to the community. As a nonprofit, the board is responsible to make sure that there's good fiscal management happening, that they are operating to fulfill the mission of the nonprofit. And I think elected service is similar in that you are there and you are responsible to, it's just a larger public, if you will. But the same thing, you want to make sure that the office that you're representing, the city in this case, is being fiscally responsible and making good decisions, and that the best interests of the public are being valued and put forward. So, so there's some similarities. Differences, I mean, there's certainly a lot of differences as well. Let's see, they're both thankless jobs. I will say one more similarity. In terms of the differences, you know, like nonprofit board service, again, you have a term, but it's a lot more fluid. People come and go. There is no sort of legal, no legal requirements in the same way. There's insurance, which is always good. Mm-hmm. There is far less public scrutiny, obviously, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but there's far less public scrutiny on a nonprofit board, less accountability. I think in an elected service, well, at least for me, although I've, you know, sat on national nonprofit boards and I was on the board of St. Mary Hospital up in Long Beach, the level of responsibility you feel as an elected board member is so much greater. And I don't know what that psychology is necessarily. Maybe it's that, you know, there are so many people that are counting on you, and there are so many viewpoints, and it's so diverse that you really have to, you know, put forward an effort, a great, tremendous effort to make sure that, you know, it's not just the loudest voices that are being considered, but it is really the whole comprehensiveness of the community that you're, you know, their views that you're putting forward.
You know, it's interesting the way you put that, because so often the community wants to feel that they're heard, and when they don't, they get louder, when that doesn't actually solve anything or actually advance the problem. And you've got to be able to filter what's important versus what's loud. And it's so easy because what gets in policy or what gets in public sight is really what's noisy and what's loud. And that may not be in the best interest of the organization. And that's got to be challenging with all of your years in public service, even on a nonprofit board that's volunteer. You got to filter the two. How do you stay true to the vision or the focus or the mission that you're there to achieve, while you're still having to allow people to feel that they're heard? Because that's a very difficult thing to do when the amplification of their noise gets higher and higher.
I think that is true. I think that there's an element, you can't take any of those things personally per se. And no, it is your responsibility to listen to everybody. And I mean, at least for me personally, you know, I take that really to heart. I think everybody needs to be heard, and everybody has a right to be heard, you know, on both types of boards. And in terms of filtering, I think in some ways it's easier with nonprofits because you have a very clear, if it's a well-run nonprofit, you have a very clear mission and vision. And so it's in some ways much easier to evaluate potential actions against that vision and mission. It's far more complicated in the larger arena of elected service. But I think that, you know, we all are coming to this with our own life experiences and our own perspectives. I think keeping that in mind, knowing what your own biases are, listening to everybody, having a collective vision on where you're going, and whether that's, you know, the charter or strategic planning, of course, because that should also be done at a elected level as well, helps you be true to those things. You know, and again, it's not black and white, you know, it is very nuanced. And so I think elected officials, I truly believe, just do the best they can. And I think there is also there's a benefit in that, you know, a board like a city council, it operates as a unit. One individual board member or a city council member doesn't have any more power than any other one. And it's really as a group that you are making these decisions and moving things forward. And so I think having those other members of the team, if you will, also helps you to be, you know, honest and accountable for where you're going.
Oh, I love, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it always seems when you look from the surface that, you know, everyone's operating independently and they forget that it's part of a unit, right, that gets things done. One person can't actually advance anything. It requires the collaboration of all parties involved, even in those elements of dissent. the hope is that through that dissent, you can craft a more functional message that serves the community in a much more meaningful way. You
And the
talked about
dissent is an important part, I think.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
because that's how
absolutely.
you get farther. It's the contrasting ideas.
Yes, I love that. We're on Real Talk. If anyone has any chat questions or comments, please work them in. And then at the end, we'll have time for live questions after the recording's over as well. You talked about your journey, and I really have two questions about it. You said you were asked 12 times to even think about running for an elected seat, and that was a health board. Uh, and now you're talking about running for city council. I don't think you woke up, after graduate school in '94 and said, "This is where I'm going to be." And so it's always so fascinating to me, and I know our listeners, as people talk about their journey and how they got here. What are some of the markers or the turning points that got you here in your life? Because I can't imagine this is what you designed when you started.
I think when I was in college, undergraduate work, I grew up in Rhode Island and I went to Providence College. There were a couple of pivotal things that happened. One, I worked my way through college by working at a homeless shelter. And I did that Monday through Friday evening, 6 to 10, 5 days a week. And that, I think, was a really pivotal thing for me, because I realized, all people did not have things easy. And B, I could, again, be part of the solution and contribute. And at the same time I was working, I did an internship at the Rhode Island Rape Crisis Center. And so similar kind of thing. It's a different, obviously, population, but, and those two things really motivated me to go to graduate school and to go into social work with an emphasis really on policy. And so that sort of started me on the journey of, again, how can we make society better and more equitable for people? So, and as I said, I did a number of different jobs and worked with, a number of different population groups. And another pivotal piece was when I moved to California. So I went from Rhode Island to New York and then eventually to San Diego. And again, the populations in some ways are a little bit different, and the challenges are a little bit different. And the structure of government in some ways is a little different. Propositions are huge in California. They're not so big in a lot of other places. So there was like a growing understanding of the government's role, I think, in changing things in society. And so I became interested in that, but again, not as a player, if you will. I think then in terms of the actual turning point in getting involved in politics, was also here in California. I supported a number of different candidates over the years. And so that sort of gave me a little bit of an inside view. And then some issues came up locally in my community. It's actually it's still an issue, the Harvest Hills development project. And that got me more active. And then at the time, I then had joined Rotary, and somebody in Rotary who is involved in politics, again, started to talk to me about, hey, you should think about this, and you can make a bigger difference. And so I think that's sort of how I came to it. And as I got to know him, better, and he introduced me to different people, and I had already, met some other folks that were involved locally in politics, and so came to it again just by wanting to help, and as just an expansion of the work I'd already been doing in human services. So.
Well, thank you for that. We all end up in so many different places that we never thought we'd be. And I know we all appreciate that you, in all that journey, have stayed focused on how you can enhance and improve the community around you, which is, a tribute to your vision and why you have an opportunity to contribute and help the community here in this role. You talked about Rotary and some of those people around you. We all have these key influencers, right, that have really either advanced us or guided us and pushed us. And, a lot of life's about learning not what not to do versus what to do. But we have those mentors that help us along the way. And I wanted to touch on, we were talking about this earlier today, on this idea of endorsements, right? And there's this perception around endorsements that, oh, they're easy to get, or they're trying to buy something from you or get access. And none of that necessarily, at times it's true, but generally it's not. How has that endorsement process been for you? Because I know you've gotten some very nice endorsements from prominent people in town, and that resonates with, you know, your message and why you're doing this. But that's got to be challenging to navigate those, and talk about how hard that is to convey your message while resonating with the whole community and those people that have decided, hey, this is somebody I want to represent our community.
Thank you for that question. And I will say, endorsements, you know, they're a complicated business, if you will. There's, unfortunately, at times, there's a lot of politics related to them. And those are the ones, you know, I try, quite frankly, to stay away from. I very much try to go for really more personal endorsements. I just felt like personally it means more if somebody who knows me is endorsing me, that knows my work. I think, you know, I mean, I have, you know, multiple, but some really important ones to me. Obviously, one of the most important is our mayor, Paul McNamara. And actually, he's the guy in Rotary that I referenced earlier, and it's a much better
that's what I
story
guessed.
now that he is actually mayor. It wasn't as great a story before he was mayor, but anyway. So, you know, I met him in Rotary. He was still on the community college board at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, again, he and I wouldn't even say we were friends, actually. I had just, you know, when you join Rotary, you have to do that, who am I? And so I had done that, who am I? And that's when he sort of approached me and said, hey, think about this. And I got to know him a bit after that. But at that time, he was also transitioning out of sort of corporate work and wanted to get involved in nonprofits. And so I had introduced him actually to the board. At that time, I was the executive director of Girls Inc. of San Diego County, which was a nonprofit. And I knew Paul had 4 daughters and, you know, was a feminist and very interested in nonprofits. So I had sort of introduced him to my board. And so he ended up joining my board. And so he worked sort of as my boss, I guess, on the board. And so he knew my work. And so his endorsement, you know, for council really meant a lot to me. So that was you know, probably the first most important one. And then there's 2 others that I guess are a little bit surprising because I've only gotten to know them recently. Jerry Harmon, who used to be the mayor of Escondido many years ago. Mm-hmm. And Jerry Harmon is a guy that I knew just sort of casually, but I didn't know him well by any means. And, you know, as I started to get the word out that I was interested in running and throwing my hat in the ring and wanted to, you know, help in Escondido, he actually approached me and you know, had heard my message and we chatted a bit and I talked a bit about my vision, and he was like, hey, he basically offered the endorsement. And that meant so much to me because obviously he's a very well-respected guy and just has done amazing things for Escondido. So that really meant a lot to me. And obviously a new friend, which was lovely.
That's fantastic.
And then the other one, I think that is the most important. And because I feel like it's also very symbolic. Same thing, not somebody I knew very well, but I knew her a little bit, is Lori Filer, also the previous mayor of Escondido. And interestingly enough, a centrist, but a Republican. And so it would have been very easy for her to, I think, endorse the Republican candidate in this race, this nonpartisan race. But she didn't. And, you know, I just appreciated that. I knew her just a little bit. But again, she sort of heard my message, and she was somebody who I just really respected as very nonpartisan. And so, you know, when I asked her and she agreed, it meant a lot to me, and it still does. So I think that those folks are also pretty representative of, you know, who I am and, you know, what I think my campaign is about. So.
Love it. Well, thank you for that. I know that they're cherished when they come, and they're hard to get, so congratulations. We have some really good questions that have come in that I'm going to work in. This is Real Talk with Ryan. If any of you have any more questions or comments, feel free to chat this in. We're here with Dara, who's running for Escondido City Council's District 3. One of the questions is, I don't want to talk about politics. This isn't a political show, right? So, but there is this interesting thing. We've had some really great guests in the past over the last few weeks. Cherie Jones, who's the head of Black San Diego. We've had Donna DeBerry, who is in charge of the Black San Diego Chamber of Commerce. We had Betsy Lynch, who is the executive director at the Jewish Community Center, and they've all talked about this this scrutiny related to females and women in politics or women in positions of power. And you see, Amy Coney Barrett up on the Supreme Court getting asked by the senators about life balance. And men don't get asked questions about life balance. And that just drives me crazy that this is inequality. And you feeling like you've had to been asked 12 times to do something where a man gets asked once. And so it's a two-part question. And for all of our listeners now who either don't see it or have experienced this, how have you navigated that? And have you seen this discrimination around how a male counterpart is treated versus you've been treated? And then also persevering through that as you go from public service or private service to an elected service, how that scrutiny becomes more intense. Talk to us about that experience for you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's been kind of interesting. I think I like to think that I'm kind of a front runner in this race. And yet I feel like in some ways, all of my lifetime of experience has been somewhat discredited publicly. And I don't know if that would happen if I were a man, to be honest. And there's that old saying, a woman has to work 3 times as hard or 5 times as hard. And I do think that that's true. Somewhat. I don't know. We'll see. I know I've worked really hard in this campaign. We'll see what happens, after Election Day. I'll tell you where I actually have found that even in a more pronounced way was when I was chair of the Palomar Health District Board. Because chair of a $4 billion organization, I was, I think, the youngest person at that time who had ever been on the board, and certainly had served as the chairperson of the board. And again, you even want to say chairman of the board, and at that time, I saw it very acutely at that time that I was hiring myself and the board, because as we've talked about, it is a group effort and decision, but we were looking to replace the retiring CEO. And so we had negotiated, to identify the right internal person, because we needed somebody right away. And we had identified Diane Hansen, who I didn't know prior to, my work at Palomar and her work at Palomar. Actually, I just didn't even know she existed until she was hired as the CFO by the previous CEO. And so, we came to a decision that she would make a great interim. And then at that time, there were a lot of challenges going on, as there always are with a disruption in executive leaders. And there were, just a number of other things going on across the country with, challenges for hospitals. And so ultimately, she was put into the interim CEO role and just did an amazing job. She settled a union contract that had been outstanding for more than 6 months. The hospital had had financial challenges since they had opened the new build, and she righted the ship. I mean, very quickly. She restructured the administrative office and cut out over $1 million, just really exceptional. And yet we received so much flack for hiring this, this person. And I think it was because she was a woman. I really, truly believe that flack was because she was a woman that we were elevating, to this position. She wasn't paid as much as the previous CEO, Michael Covert, who had built the hospital, was in charge when the hospital was being built, et cetera. And it was just that was very eye-opening for me. So I think that, every woman who's a professional woman, and actually women that aren't even, professional women, just being a female in this country, you walk through challenges every day, I think. In terms of an elected role, sure, I'm sensitive to it, but, I'm certainly not overwhelmed by it. And I've seen it enough and dealt with it enough and persevered through it enough, again, in all levels, as an employer, as an elected, official, as a candidate myself, so you just get through it. But yes, it still exists. So the long way of agreeing with you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for persevering. I know that you advance the cause of so many others by your willingness to persevere, when it would be so easy to just put your hands up and say, this is ridiculous. I'm not fighting this. I'm not putting myself to this kind of scrutiny going through a campaign that really, really can wear on you. So thank you for that. Everybody in business, and really anyone in life, in the last 6 months has had to deal with pivots. I know for you, you and I met a year ago or so and talked about this campaign, what you might try to do. And I know in your wildest dreams, you never imagined this would be the kind of campaign you have to run, right?
No.
No one anticipated this sequence of events, and with this pandemic, and everybody in business and everyone at home and people with kids and people with living around. I mean, there isn't anybody that's not in some way impacted in dealing with change. When you think about government and you think about you and going through this, government is now stuck with budget deficits and lowered tax revenues and loss of services that can be provided, and then slow in processing paperwork. How has your position or your ideas about it changed and pivoted, both from how you have to run your campaign now to also your perception of how government can play a role in helping people stay alive and simplifying the process when they don't have access to the same level of service they had before, because the government just don't have the funds to provide it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. I'll start with the campaign and the election. So completely different in so many ways than I would have guessed. But that being said, a lot sort of stayed the same. The campaign structure is still sort of run the same way. I've been fortunate. I have, following social distancing guidelines and wearing my mask and, all those things, but I have been able to get out and talk to voters, and that has been great. Because in some ways, I feel like I am more in touch with folks than I would have been if I do get elected. I'm far more in touch with the challenges, the current challenges people are dealing with. So that, if I am elected, I will be sitting in that seat with a whole wealth of knowledge that I didn't have access to before. That's okay. In terms of government, this is going to be, probably the hardest time to be a city council member. And it is an awesome responsibility. And I will tell you, I am, definitely going in with my eyes open in terms of what the challenges are. I think, it is time, if anything, it shows our need to come together as a community and to work together and to not fight amongst each other. And enough of this, they get that and we get this, and because unless we all come together, we are a community that is suffering from COVID-19, and we are a community that is going to suffer from the after effects of this for a long time. So we need to have our best minds together to come up with a really good plan. And what that good plan is, again, I will contribute my 2 cents, but the magic happens when you get, the great minds in the room, if you will. And I look forward to working really closely with, obviously, the other council members, but the city manager and the staff, because they have they're very bright. They've been doing this work for years and years. And so they have a lot to add to this. I mean, there are certainly the, the straightforward things I can say. We need to maximize all of the funding that's available. We need to pull down the money from the federal government and from the state and the county in every possible way. And we need to do a much better job about communicating what is available out to folks, to businesses. I can't tell you how many businesses I talked to around the PPP dollars that just still had no idea. In the campaign, I've walked, and talked with many of the business owners, and, the fear that I found from a lot of small businesses about getting this money. And, I've heard then that, I'll have to pay it back. And, what if I can't do that? And that will bankrupt me. And my life savings is in this, all of those things. I think there's just a ton of misinformation out there. So I think the government definitely has a role in telling people what's available and helping them to access it. So we need more of that. Certainly, we need to look at any way we can do cost savings and also just accurate predicting. And now they're saying our tax revenue that they thought was going to be, depressed at a certain level is actually slightly better than they thought. So again, just really being in touch with the data and being really on point with it and not spreading sort of panic and mayhem, if you will. So I think, making plans from a place of realism and understanding what exactly the situation is. And then obviously you're going to look at cutting where you can cut. I always favor, sort of as a bottom line, or a intrinsic value, you save jobs whenever you can. So again, some of the things that I would put forward are the things that I employed, as a CEO and executive director, right? You save money through attrition, as opposed to doing layoffs, some of those things. You offer early retirement, you look at different incentives, things that you can do to, affect some savings, because every little bit will help. I also think there are, with most disasters, and this is definitely a disaster, there are new opportunities that we don't think about, that suddenly, appear. And I think that we're going to find that in terms of some new business opportunities. I think as a country, we have realized that supply chain, locally, regionally in this country is so much more important than we ever thought. Anybody that, was at Target looking for the toilet paper and, not finding it and feeling panic, that sort of thing. I think as a country, we're going to pay a lot more attention and make more manufacturing opportunities available. And so I think we need to take full advantage of that. There are businesses that are doing well, or better than others, certainly. And I think we need to try to do what we can to attract them. Again, there's that old saying, you can't cut to greatness. And I do believe that deep in my heart. That's always been my experience. So you look to be as creative as you possibly can be and, cut where you have to, but try to keep growing and moving forward. And again, there's no magic bullet. It's just going to take a lot of people trying a lot of different things to get us where we need, get us through this.
I like that. You can't cut to greatness.
No,
that's a great statement. Thank you for that. You bring in all this experience in different categories of your life service, with nonprofits and with volunteer boards and with elected boards and now potentially at the city council. If you were going to think about and describe briefly your leadership style, in the accumulation of all that experience, what do you come to the table with? How do you engage and what leadership platform or style do you bring to the table coming in?
I always feel like a great leader is not somebody that comes to the table with a style set in stone, but instead adapts to the needs of their team. And that's how I've always approached my professional life and leadership roles, and how I've, really come to my elected roles as well. I think leaders need a good dose of humility, and I try to bring that. I do not believe that I'm the smartest person in the room. And in fact, I think my strength, or one of my strengths, is that I think I encourage people and empower people to put their best foot forward. And so I don't feel like I, have all the answers, and I'm not gonna, go in and undermine the great minds already in the room. I, will encourage people to come together and put forth their best ideas. So I guess if you want to call that a style, I guess I would say I am I take an empowering sort of approach. I will tell you, I'm like anally organized though. So I am definitely one to keep folks on track and keep the vision out there, and remind people of what the vision is. And, I love cats. And sometimes I think leadership is a little bit about herding cats, and I'm okay with that, and I think I have those kinds of skills as well.
We had Miguel De Jesus from Cal State San Marcos on a few weeks ago, and one of his lines was, "If you're the smartest person in the group, find a new group."
Exactly.
I believe so. It's interesting that you resonate with that and that you shared that. We're getting ready to go to live questions, and Dara, thank you for doing this today and sharing a little bit about your story and experiences and challenges that you faced coming into this. And I know there'll be questions afterwards, but I had one final question, and I'd love to hear your perception for you on this, because in some ways it's the thing that matters most. Organizationally in here at RG, we talk about how the work we do makes a difference and why we do what we do to try to change the statistics on success for small business and create and provide support for people that have a chance to change generational wealth through the success of their business. And I know that in that it elevates the community. And you and I were talking earlier that community and elevating the community is so important. And so my last question for you is, why does community matter so much to you? Because I think that drives why you do any of this in the first place.
I think community is the natural state of the world, in that we are born into communities. No man or woman is an island. And the joy, I think, that human beings get from the world is related to their connections to others. And so I think that's why community is important. It is sort of the end all be all, if you will. I don't think we as individuals are anything without community. So I don't know, I've just always operated my life like that it is all about community. So yeah, it's not super complex. It's just I think the most important thing.
No, thank you for that. A follow-up to that is, there are so many that find different paths, right, to impact those that are around them. Some are central focused, some are externally focused, some are community focused, and everyone's different. There's room for everybody in every walk of life and every idea. But so much of your whole life is driven to you asked me right at the beginning before we started today, why this mattered, why am I even doing this, and why community matters to me. And it was so interesting seeing that reflected back in me and how I was processing and answering that question. Really, every role you've had in your career has been community focused. And where did that drive come from for you?
Well, I think that I was the youngest of 6 kids, and both of my parents were very community focused. They had a lot of challenges. I think my mother grew up very poor, and my father had a lot of tragedy in his life growing up, although he was not poor. But those are different kinds of traumas. And I think it just made them very giving, caring people. And then, I think I've always had the experience within that family of always looking outward. My family has always been engaged in the greater world. And we've always talked about, folks that were not as lucky as we were, or folks that, thought differently than than our family did. And, not one being better than the other. When I was in 7th grade, my dad took a teaching job. He was a college professor, and he took a teaching job in Europe. So for my 7th grade year, I lived in Italy, Belgium, and Germany for 4 months each. Now, at age 12 and 13, you can imagine I thought that was the worst thing in the world. And my sister was in 9th grade at the time, so that was even worse for her. But my parents believed so strongly that that we needed to see how that the world was bigger than our only, than our little enclave. And that everybody's ideas were just as valid as ours. And I think that that being raised that way has always inspired me to be out in the world serving my community.
Well, thank you for your dedication. Thank you for your effort and perseverance. I know that the road is challenging. The obstacles are great, but we wish the best for you and luck in the coming election. Thank you so much for doing this so close. I know you've got so much to do between now and then, but on behalf of everyone on the call and then the community at large who's going to listen later, thank you for that and the contribution you've made to all of our lives and will continue to make after this. So thank you, Dara, so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.